She parked in my driveway against smack in the middle like she owned the place. No knock, no explanation, just that same smug expression through the window and a smirk that said everything. This wasn't just inconsiderate parking, it was a statement, and when I finally confronted her about it, she said something that left me speechless, as if the street somehow fell under her property line. But it wasn't just about me anymore, it was about power. And the second I stopped playing nice, everything shifted. Ever had a neighbor like that? Drop a comment. I know I'm not the only one. That morning started off calm out on my 20-acre ranch. A light fog hung over the field, the chickens scratched contentedly in the dirt, and the steam from my coffee curled into the crisp air as I relaxed on the porch. After 2 decades as a county police chief facing crime and corruption, this ranch was my haven, my retirement dream finally realized. I remember drizzling honey into my tea when the ground began to tremble. My first thought, earthquake. Then came the screech of metal against wood. The rumbling got louder, purposeful, mechanical. Something big was coming straight at the peaceful morning I'd carved out for myself. The next day, I woke to the deep growl of diesel engines right outside my window. Figured maybe the county was out doing road work, but the second I looked out, my stomach dropped. A huge yellow bulldozer was crashing through my wooden fence like it was made of matchsticks. The cracking would echo through the air as 8 months of work disappeared in under a minute. I yanked on my clothes and ran outside. And there she was, Donna Vance, standing about 20 yards away with her phone out, orchestrating the whole thing like a general leading a charge. She walked across the gravel like it was a red carpet, heels tapping like they owned the ground beneath them. Her mirrored sunglasses caught my stunned reflection like I was already a problem she dealt with. She was probably in her early 50s, polished to perfection, dressed in clothes that likely cost more than most folks' monthly rent. She scanned my land like she'd already claimed it. No greeting, no hesitation. Just stopped a few feet from the fence, raised her phone, and snap, snap. Photos first. Talk later. Go ahead, Frank, she called to the man behind the bulldozer. I don't want that. I saw her standing another day. Frank, the operator, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He avoided eye contact, visibly uncomfortable. He probably knew what he was doing was wrong but couldn't afford to say no. I couldn't blame him, but Donna, she was loving every second of it. Grinning as she watched my land being ripped apart. This wasn't just business, to her it was sport. 8 months of blood, sweat, and work gone, and she was happy about it. And then came the worst part, my little oak. A sapling I'd planted from an acorn on my first day here. It meant something. It was my fresh start, my new chapter. I watched it get crushed under the treads like it was nothing. I planted that on my first day here, I said, but my words trailed off. Couldn't even finish the sentence. I stood frozen as everything I'd built got buried beneath broken wood and fresh dirt. Not gonna lie, I felt tears start to well up. That tree wasn't just a tree, it was hope. It was everything I'd worked toward for 2 decades. But then instinct kicked in. Years of training as a cop came rushing back. No yelling, no acting out, no emotion, just procedure. I calmly pulled out my phone and started recording. Took photos of the damage, video of Donna directing the scene, close-ups of the bulldozer's plate, and snapshots of Frank's guilty face, documenting it all just like I'd done in hundreds of cases before. Donna kept looking my way, that same arrogant smirk like she was daring me to do something. But I stayed calm. I knew better. Sometimes patience is the sharpest weapon, and I could tell my silence was throwing her off. She probably expected a scene, a meltdown she could use against me. Instead, I gave her nothing but quiet precision. I filmed her giving orders, noted the time, captured every angle. 20 years of law enforcement had taught me every case hinges on the details, and I wasn't missing a single one. This is what happens when you don't follow the community, she said, voice dripping with satisfaction. I wanted to confront her right then and there, tell her exactly what I thought, but I didn't. I stayed focused, kept documenting, and calmly said, "All right, Donna. Now I understand. Time to show you what happens when you mess with the wrong man." My voice was steady, just like I used to sound when cuffing criminals who thought they were above the law. For just a second, I saw doubt flicker across her face. Maybe she heard something in my tone that made her realize she'd pushed too far. A crow cawed in the distance, then silence, stillness. Even the wind held its breath. No county truck, no citation, just Donna, a clipboard, and a bulldozer with no license plate. The whole thing screamed illegal, like a crime unfolding in real time. And I knew exactly how to build a case against people who thought rules didn't apply to them. The damage totaled around $12,000, $7,000 for the fence, another $3,000 for landscaping, and $2,000 for fixing the grading. But money didn't even scratch the surface. This ranch was my safe haven, my retirement dream. And she tore it apart because she could. Neighbors watched the whole thing, some from their porches, others peeking through curtains. But none of them spoke up. Fear kept this place quiet. And Donna Vance was the reason. What stung the most wasn't the silence, it was their expressions. I saw the guilt on their faces. Mrs. Henderson, 2 doors down, looked like she wanted to say something. But every time Donna looked her way, she'd look away. The mailman stopped his truck and stared for a full minute before driving off without delivering a thing. Even he knew something wasn't right, but no one said a word. This wasn't a neighborhood, it was a regime, and Donna was the one pulling the strings. When the bulldozer finally finished and rolled off, I stood among the ruined, splintered fence, crushed plants, dreams in pieces. Donna strolled over, same smug grin still painted on. "Hope you've learned your lesson, John," she said. "This neighborhood has standards, and we intend to uphold them." Then she turned, got into her shiny black SUV, and drove off, leaving me standing in the aftermath like a tornado had just passed through. I watched her tail lights disappear around the bend and felt something settle in my chest. Cold, final. This wasn't finished. Not even close. I stood tall. She smiled like that's exactly what she'd hoped for. And that's when I understood the truth. This wasn't about property lines or fences. She wanted me gone. 20-4 years ago, I buried my first dog beneath that oak, built the fence to protect the spot. Now, tire tracks crossed the very place his name used to rest. That little tree, my symbol of starting over, was flattened like it meant nothing. But it did mean something. That tree was hope. It was everything I'd worked toward. Watching it fall felt like watching my future crushed under cold, uncaring metal. I bent down, picked up a piece of its bark. It crumbled in my hand like it had waited for this exact moment to let go. The damage went far beyond the physical. It was emotional, calculated to break me. She chose that tree on purpose. This wasn't random, it was deliberate. Psychological warfare meant to take out the one person who didn't fall in line. Every shattered branch was another stolen piece of peace I'd spent 20 years earning. "Go ahead, Frank," she'd ordered with a smile. And Frank he looked like. The guilt was eating him alive. Couldn't meet my eyes. Just a guy doing a job he probably wished he could walk away from. But Donna. She watched every second with satisfaction. 8 months of effort destroyed. And she enjoyed every moment of it. And that's when my training as a cop kicked in. Years of instincts honed from 2 decades in law enforcement snapped into action. No yelling, no confrontations, no giving in to emotion. I kept my cool, pulled out my phone, and began gathering evidence. I took photos of the damage, recorded videos of Donna barking out orders, zoomed in on the bulldozer's license plate, and caught every flicker of discomfort on Frank's face. I was in documentation mode just like I'd done 100 times before. Donna kept glancing my way, wearing this self-satisfied smirk, almost daring me to try to intervene. But I stayed calm, and I could see it was throwing her off. She probably expected a shouting match, or better yet, a physical altercation, something she could twist around and call the cops on. Instead, I was silently compiling evidence, treating it like any other investigation, because in a sense, it was. 2 decades of case building had taught me one thing: the smallest details always mattered, and I was making sure not a single one slipped past me. I asked who had authorized the demolition. She claimed the board had. I asked who voted for it. She quickly changed the subject. I let her keep talking. That was her mistake. This is the fallout when people stop working with the community. "John," she called out, her voice thick with smugness. I had to fight the urge to confront her then and there, to tell her exactly what I thought of her so-called community. But 20 years of dealing with manipulative criminals had trained me to wait. So instead, I kept photographing the mess and said, "Okay, Donna, I see what you're doing. Now let me show you what happens when you go after the wrong guy." The destruction was massive: 12 grand in damages, 7,000 for the fence, 3 for the yard and plants, another 2 for fixing the grading. It would take a lot to restore the land. But the emotional damage, That couldn't be priced. This was supposed to be my refuge, my peaceful post-retirement dream. And she ripped it apart just because she could. Neighbors had come out to watch. Some stood on porches, others peered from behind curtains. Not a single one spoke up. What really burned was watching their reactions: quiet whispering, disapproving glances, headshakes. But no words. Mrs. Henderson, a few houses down, looked like she wanted to say something, maybe even apologize. But every time Donna glanced her way, she'd divert her eyes. Even the mailman froze in place, just sitting there in his truck, watching for a solid minute before pulling away without dropping off the mail. It felt like this entire neighborhood was under a silent regime, and nobody dared say it out loud. At the store, one neighbor avoided my eyes, another crossed the street. They weren't just silent, they were coordinated, like they'd been instructed not to engage. Everyone was walking on eggshells, afraid to acknowledge the truth. Donna had built a climate of fear so thick it choked basic decency. Lifelong neighbors were suddenly strangers, too scared to offer a kind word to someone whose property had just been torn apart. Once the bulldozer finished, I stood in the middle of the wreckage, what used to be my fence, surrounded by shattered boards and trampled plants. Donna strutted over, still wearing that smug grin. "I hope this was a learning experience, John," she said. "This neighborhood has standards, and we intend to uphold them." Then she turned, climbed into her black SUV, and drove off, leaving me behind, looking like a storm had just rolled through and erased everything I'd built. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop. I typed Vance Landscaping LLC into the search bar. My finger hovered over the enter key. Was I really going to dive into this mess? Risk disrupting the peace I'd worked so hard for? Truth is, I already knew the answer. 2 decades as a cop doesn't just vanish when you turn in your badge. Some battles you walk away from. Others come knocking. Before I could finish the thought, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Jenkins. She sounded panicked. "John," she whispered, "I just saw Donna outside, on her phone, pointing at your property. I think she's planning something for tomorrow morning." She looked more serious than I'd ever seen. "Should I call the police?" I nearly laughed, but I kept my tone steady. "Thanks, Mrs. Jenkins. I'll be ready." First thing I did was call Greg Miller, a real estate attorney I used to work with during my time on the force. I told him everything. His reaction was immediate. "John, this is criminal property destruction. If she had financial intent behind it, we're talking fraud. But if she's bought off enough of the HOA board, you've got a fight ahead." That's when it hit me. I wasn't just up against one corrupt HOA president. I could be dealing with a whole rigged system. Later that evening, I noticed my mailbox was gone. Not smashed, removed. In its place was a wooden stake with orange tape wrapped around it. No words were necessary. The message was clear. They were marking my land like it was condemned, like they already owned it. They were ramping up the psychological warfare, trying to wear me down, but they underestimated me. I'd spent 20 years dismantling criminal minds who thought they were above the law. I jumped online and checked the county's property records. A new note had been added to my lot, pending review. I hadn't submitted anything. I pulled open my old file cabinet, first time in years. Inside were zoning maps, documents from my time as sheriff, and 3 voice recorders I never thought I'd touch again. The weight of them brought back a familiar rhythm. Thousands of cases, and here I was stepping back into the game. Maybe retirement wasn't about escaping the job. Maybe it was about putting those skills to use in a way that mattered to me. So I did what I do best. I started investigating. Hours flew by as I poured through public records, particularly the HOA's financials. Most people don't realize HOA budgets are public if you know where to dig. What I found made my blood boil. Over the past year and a half, the Meadowbrook HOA had paid $85,000 to Vance Landscaping for community improvements, $85,000, to a company that just so happened to share the last name of the HOA president. I pinned a map to the wall and marked every property that had been hit with a violation in the last year. Then I circled the ones that sold within 6 months of receiving the citation. A pattern emerged. First, properties were hit with violations and fines. Then, they were sold below market value, often to shell companies. It was a coordinated land grab, and Donna Vance was at the center. But the real bombshell came when I dug into the business registration for Vance Landscaping. Owner: Roger Vance, Donna's younger brother. This wasn't about offense. This was organized fraud. HOA funds funneled straight into family pockets. I leaned back from the screen, that old rush flooding in. The moment where everything clicks into place. Donna had been pulling this scam for months, maybe longer. And I was just the latest casualty. Someone had tried to fight back. There was a complaint on file from last spring dismissed without explanation. The owner's name was blacked out. That property, now owned by a shell company. Same address as the HOA lawyer. This went deeper than Donna and Roger. This was a web of collusion. The HOA attorney, multiple board members, possibly even local government turning a blind eye. I followed the money like I used to on the force. Shell companies, landscaping fees, security contracts, consulting invoices. Every dollar traced back to someone in Donna's extended family. It wasn't just corruption, it was theft, masked as neighborhood care. HOA members were seeing their fees go up year after year. They thought it was for improvements, but it was going into the Vance family's bank accounts. And then I found the kicker: payments to Donna's cousin for security consulting, even though the area hadn't had a single incident. Her nephew, paid to maintain a pool that didn't exist. Her brother-in-law, billing for snow removal in a state that rarely sees snow. She had turned the HOA into her personal cash machine. And no one had looked close enough to stop her. Then I caught a break. Someone on the board anonymously sent me a batch of leaked emails. One stood out: the border area needs improvement. Roger is ready to invoice. It was dated 3 weeks before Donna even mentioned my fence. They'd planned this from the start. My fence wasn't about the community. It was a setup, a reason to approve another funny invoice. When I inserted the thumb drive into my laptop, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Retirement hadn't changed who I was. It just gave me a personal reason to fight. This time, it wasn't about justice for strangers. It was for my home, my peace, my right to live without being bullied. I filed a formal complaint with the county. I thought the evidence would be enough, but it got rejected. Insufficient proof of financial intent, they said. Just like Greg had warned, the system was shielding Donna. Paper trails weren't enough. I needed something undeniable. So I shifted tactics, started building the case like I had against crime syndicates. And I reached out to someone who could help: Emily Johnson, Channel 7. She'd reported on some of my biggest busts back in the day. She didn't know who I was now, but that didn't matter. Emily, I told her, I've uncovered an HOA corruption scheme. Fraud, power abuse, resident intimidation. Want the story? She replied instantly. How deep does it go? Pretty deep, I said. Do you have proof? Not yet, I admitted. Then off the record means nothing, she told me. Bring me something real. I wasn't here to gossip. I was here to expose the truth. I began reaching out to other HOA members carefully, discreetly. Most were still too frightened, but a few gave vague nods toward Donna's history of bullying. Mysterious fee increases, threats of legal action, constant fear. A clear picture was forming: one of years of abuse, masked by neighborhood pride. Mrs. Jenkins finally opened up. One night as I sat on the porch, surrounded by debris. John, she whispered, I've been meaning to tell you. Last year, Donna made my neighbor tear up his vegetable garden. Said it didn't look nice. When he pushed back, violations started piling up. His mailbox was 2 inches off. Grass a 1/4 inch too tall. Wrong font on his house number. They wore him down until he gave in. Later that night, I uncovered something that made my hands tremble with fury. Roger Vance had 0 real credentials in landscaping, no certifications, no licenses, and his business had only been registered a mere 2 weeks before the HOA issued its first payment. This man was a total con artist, pocketing tens of thousands of dollars for work he had no qualifications to perform. I stared at his bogus documents glowing back at me from my laptop, and that old fire that used to fuel me in my hardest investigations started burning again. That same night, I noticed fresh tire marks at the foot of my driveway. All of my security cameras had been disabled. Not broken, just shut off. The next morning, I headed straight to the county records office, not for paperwork but to look someone in the eye. As soon as the clerk heard my name, she hesitated. After 2 decades working law enforcement in this county, I could tell when someone was deliberately withholding information. What I didn't anticipate was the nervous glance and twitching hands when I asked about recent HOA filings. It was clear. Something or someone had them on edge. And I was beginning to realize Donna's reach extended much further than I originally believed. What Donna did next made one thing undeniable. She was sharper and far more dangerous than I'd thought. Instead of backing off after wrecking my property, she went on the attack. 2 days after the bulldozer tore through my fence, a county environmental inspector showed up unannounced. Turns out Donna had lodged a formal complaint, alleging my ranch was a contamination threat to the local water system. It was an outright lie. My chickens were well within legal limits. My composting methods were by the book. I'd taken every precaution to meet environmental codes. The inspector, a weird-looking guy named Dave, seemed genuinely regretful. "Mr. Doe," he said, "I know this is harassment, but I'm required to investigate any report that comes through. If you can show me documentation that you're in compliance, we can close this out quickly." Even so, I had to shell out $3,000 for environmental consultants just to verify what I already knew, that my ranch ran cleaner and more eco-conscious than most properties in the county. The mounting pressure was hitting me harder than expected. One afternoon, as I picked up splinters and debris from the wrecked fence, Mrs. Jenkins, my nearest neighbor and one of the few who'd shown me any kindness, approached cautiously. "John," she said, "please don't take this the wrong way, but are you really just a farmer? The way you're handling all this, the records, how come you are under fire? It's not normal." I crossed paths with Harold Meeks outside the zoning board office. I asked him to direct questions. He didn't answer either. Just looked at me and said, "You're retired. You should act like it." The warning was subtle, but unmistakable. Harold had served on that board for 15 years, and the sudden coldness in his tone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about Donna anymore. This was a coordinated effort, a web of people working together to manipulate the system. That's when I reached out to Emily Johnson, an investigative journalist at Channel 7. She had covered several major cases from my days in law enforcement, though at that point, she didn't know who I really was. We walked the property line together, along the path where my fence once stood. Her phone was recording the entire time. "They've done this before, haven't they?" she asked. When I told her about the $85,000 in phony payments, the destroyed property, the intimidation campaign, she agreed to dig in deeper. But Donna wasn't finished. Over the next week, she launched what can only be described as a psychological siege. More neighbors started filing complaints, noise violations for my chickens, code issues related to construction debris, which was, ironically, from the bulldozer attack, even accusations that my hens were a danger to neighborhood kids. Some residents refused to get involved, but others bought into her lies or were simply too scared to say otherwise. The chicken complaint was laughable. "My hens are gentler than most stuffed toys. 6 Rhode Island Reds, happy to spend their time pecking around for bugs and taking dust baths. Their most aggressive behavior, getting overly excited when I bring out the mealworms." Still, Donna's official claim painted them as miniature monsters terrorizing local children and threatening public safety. I had to laugh when I read it. Dave, the same inspector who visited before, returned to investigate this new hazard. He spent an hour walking the grounds, testing soil, inspecting compost, watching the chickens. Finally, he shook his head and said, "Mr. Doe, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never seen a cleaner, more environmentally sound setup than yours. I kept meticulous records, every false accusation, every questionable payment, every harassment attempt." My dining room table turned into an investigation hub. Photos, timelines, documents, maps, just like I used to build when I was taking down organized crime. Only this time, it was personal. This was about my land, my peace, my life. Everyone has a breaking point. Mine came when Donna started bribing neighbors. Mrs. Jenkins told me about it first. "John," she said, "she offered me $200 to sign a complaint about your chickens. I refused, but I know at least 3 people who accepted. She's out of control, and I'm honestly scared about what she might do next." That evening, I sat on the porch staring at the ruins of my fence. Someone had tampered with my power box. My cameras blinked twice, then froze. When I reviewed the footage, 3 full minutes were missing. The message couldn't have been clearer. They could get in any time, take down my defenses, and leave me exposed. What they didn't know was that 2 decades of police work had taught me to anticipate this. I had backups, hidden systems, ways of recording and documenting that didn't rely on obvious tech. Then her voice came through, unsteady, almost desperate. John, we need to talk. Before either of us does something we'll regret. Was this the start of a negotiation? Had she caught wind of my meeting with the reporter? Or was this just her boldest move yet? Looking back, I think she finally realized I wasn't some simple farmer, and that scared her more than anything. Sometimes the real threat is when someone figures out they're not the one in control anymore. The next morning, I found a new notice posted on my door, not from the HOA, but from the county courthouse. 10 days to vacate. At the hearing, the room was packed. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months filled the seats. Donna stood proudly at the front, grinning like the host of some rigged game show. I waited. Emily Johnson arrived at dawn with her news crew. I'd laid everything out like I was presenting evidence to a grand jury: photos of my damaged property, bank records from the HOA, leaked emails, and a full audit trail linking Donna and Roger Vance. We set up the interview right there on my porch, with the destroyed fence in full view behind us. Emily asked me to walk through the entire story. I explained how what started as a peaceful retirement plan had spiraled into uncovering years of financial corruption. The property damage, I said, that's just the beginning. Follow the money, and you'll see a long-standing pattern of abuse. Within hours of the segment airing, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. The story exploded across local social media. #HoScandal was trending countywide. Current board members who'd suffered silently under Donna's control started speaking out, demanding her resignation and a full audit. Former members came forward with their own accounts of threats and shady dealings. The dam had burst. Donna's carefully constructed empire of fear was falling apart. The media frenzy was unlike anything I'd faced, even in my police days. News vans lined my street. Journalists knocked on every door, gathering quotes. Suddenly, everyone had a Donna story to share. The woman who once controlled every corner of the community was now the one under siege. I watched from my porch, as neighbors I'd never heard speak before finally found their voices. But the best part, watching Donna try to control the chaos. She hired a pricey PR team, but you can't spin fraud and power abuse. I saw her peek through her curtains as cameras camped outside, no doubt wondering how her perfect little kingdom had turned into this mess. That's when my phone lit up with her number. I could tell instantly she was shaken. Her voice trembled. "John, let's settle this quietly. $50,000 and you stay silent. We can both walk away." I smiled. After months of attacks, she was finally offering to buy me off. But she underestimated who she was dealing with. When she threatened me publicly, I let the silence hang. Then I walked over, opened a drawer, and pulled out my old badge, the one I retired with but never turned in. I laid 3 documents on the table. The permit override she signed, the cease and desist she ignored, and my badge. The line was silent. For nearly 10 seconds, I could almost hear her world collapse. I told her I'd spent 20 years defending this county, and I wasn't about to let it rot while I sat in silence. Emily's crew, still packing their gear, stopped in their tracks. "Wait," she said, eyes wide, "you're the former police chief." This just turned into the biggest story of the year. What began as a property dispute had now escalated into a criminal case: destruction of law enforcement property, attempted bribery. Donna's voice finally came through. You're a cop." Then the line went dead. She had probably called her lawyer, trying to figure out just how deep the hole was. The answer, very. Word spread fast. People who'd been too afraid to speak were now lining up to tell their stories. Corruption, power abused, a masked identity brought to light. And finally, the scales of justice beginning to balance. Have you ever had one of those moments where you shared something about yourself that changed everything? Like, suddenly, people saw you in a completely different light. That's what just happened to me, and I couldn't quite tell if it felt like winning or if I'd just lost something I'd never get back. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Donna's high-powered lawyer, insisting on an urgent meeting. As I reached for the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that coming clean about who I really was may have been the right call in the name of justice, but possibly the wrong one for the quiet retirement I'd spent years protecting. Sometimes, you can't have peace and justice at the same time. And I was starting to understand I'd chosen justice. Now I had to live with what that meant, too. Decades of wearing the badge were pressing back down on my shoulders. The room fell into silence when the county marshal entered. His eyes weren't on me. He held a sealed envelope and walked straight toward Donna. The document was legitimate. Official court seal, docket number, full citation, Donna Vance v. John Doe, not a single word about the fence, just charges of malicious interference with HOA operations. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Judge Patricia Davis's courtroom, facing what had become the most talked about local case in recent memory. The media had shown up in force. Journalists from 3 counties filled the benches, and I spotted familiar faces, neighbors from my ranch and residents from Donna's HOA scattered throughout the crowd. That morning, 2 people knocked on my door. Neither had ever said a word to me before. One brought a cup of coffee, the other asked if I needed help packing. The unexpected support meant more than I could say. After so many months of feeling cornered and alone, it was comforting to realize some folks were finally ready to stand beside me. Word of the lawsuit had spread fast, and apparently, Donna's story wasn't holding up quite like it used to. From the moment the defense took the floor, they came out swinging. "Your Honor," the attorney began, "my client was within her rights as HOA president to address valid safety concerns in the community. The area bordering Mr. Doe's property genuinely required improvements for the safety of all residents." And then, right on cue, the smear campaign began. "Isn't it interesting that Chief Doe kept his identity hidden the whole time? How can we be sure this wasn't orchestrated for his own benefit?" My jaw tightened as he tried to spin me into some kind of scheming officer who'd manipulated the entire situation for gain. But Greg Miller, my attorney, was more than prepared. In his opening remarks, Greg laid out our case with precision. "This isn't about property lines or secret identities, Your Honor. This is about organized theft of HOA funds and abuse of authority and the intentional destruction of personal property to cover it all up." He walked the court through the evidence step by step. $85,000 in fake payments to Vance Landscaping, phony business credentials for Roger Vance, and a timeline that showed my fence was targeted weeks before it ever came down. When Greg called me to testify, I spoke about the harassment, the made-up environmental complaints, and Donna's attempt to bribe me. In my 20 years as a law enforcement officer, I told the court, I've witnessed plenty of power abuse, but I've rarely seen it this blatant. Then came the real turning point. A former ally of Donna's, someone who once sat on the HOA board, stepped up with a USB drive. "Your Honor, this is a recording of a conversation between Mrs. Vance and her brother from 3 months ago. I believe it's critical to this case." Judge Davis agreed to play it. As Donna's voice filled the courtroom, silence fell. "Roger, get everything prepped. That land next door needs clearing real soon. The HOA budget will handle it, same as always." I watched as Donna's face drained of all color. Her attorney scrambled to request a delay, but it was too late. The recording laid everything bare: planning, fraud, and a clear conspiracy. Judge Davis looked genuinely unsettled. "Court will recess until tomorrow morning for sentencing," she said, and the look in her eyes told me she'd already decided Donna's fate. Outside the courthouse, Donna cornered me. "You humiliated me in front of my board. You won't get away with this." Her tone was ice cold. The polite facade had completely crumbled, revealing the small-time tyrant underneath. Her lawyer quickly pulled her away before she could dig the hole any deeper, but the image stuck. Everyone could finally see her for who she truly was. The woman who'd bullied a whole neighborhood had finally been unmasked. As I left the courthouse, I saw her being led away by her attorney, head bowed, a shell of the overconfident woman who'd once torn down my fence without a second thought. Reporters fired questions, but all I could think about was the cost of this win. Justice had been served, but it felt heavier than I'd imagined. That night, Greg forwarded me an email thread between Donna and a private firm. Subject line: urgent, counteraction strategy. And I wasn't the only one copied. That sealed the deal. The fence, it was never rebuilt. I planted lavender where the oak used to stand. Nothing would ever grow tall there again, and that somehow felt fitting. Judge Davis didn't pull any punches during sentencing. "Mrs. Vance, you exploited your position, stole from your own community, and committed willful property damage against a sworn officer. The evidence reveals a pattern that threatens the core of responsible governance." Donna received 15 months in prison, followed by 2 years of probation, and was ordered to pay $75,000 in restitution for the property damage, legal expenses, and punitive costs. Her brother Roger was sentenced to 8 months and ordered to dissolve Vance Landscaping and return the $85,000 they had siphoned. The changes that followed were exactly what the neighborhood needed. The HOA was completely overhauled. New board, mandatory financial audits, and county oversight became the norm. Property values even went up once the corruption was rooted out. Turns out, honest leadership builds stronger communities than fear-driven control. But the real transformation wasn't just in policies. It was in people. Residents began to reconnect. Conversations replaced silence. The old HOA office stood abandoned. Someone had spray-painted "We see you" across the wall. No one bothered to clean it. When Donna was finally led away in cuffs, there was no trace of the smug expression she used to wear. Just a defeated figure who'd finally been forced to face the damage she caused. What came next was something I hadn't expected. Healing. Mrs. Jenkins stopped me outside the courtroom, eyes glistening. John, I was afraid of her for so long. I forgot what it meant to speak up. I gave a short statement to the press. Justice was served today. But let this case be a warning. Corruption doesn't just happen in distant places, it can happen on our own street. I didn't fight this because of my badge. I fought because I'm a citizen whose rights were violated. The reporters pushed for more drama, more commentary, but I was ready to go home and start putting the pieces back together. Some stories don't need embellishment. They just need to be told honestly. Back at the ranch, the repairs took time, but they were a kind of therapy. The new fence is sturdier than the first. Insurance helped me upgrade everything, and the flower beds are thriving again. I even planted a new oak where the old one had stood. This one's stronger, better roots. I've learned that sometimes you have to plant something twice for it to truly last. The chickens, they went right back to laying eggs, like nothing had ever happened. Guess chickens know better than to dwell on the past. The whole rebuilding process turned into a community event. People who'd once avoided me were now dropping by with offers to help. Mrs. Jenkins brought cookies every single day. The veteran I mentioned before, the one forced to tear down his memorial, showed up with his truck to help clear debris. Even some of Donna's old supporters came by with apologies and offers of assistance. It felt like, for the first time in years, the neighborhood was breathing again. Greg stopped by with a box of peaches. Said they were from the cabins. Didn't say thank you, but he didn't have to. Life returned to its rhythm. Morning coffee on the porch, sunrises, the soft clucking of chickens instead of the roar of bulldozers. No more urgent phone calls, no more threatening letters. No more wondering what Donna might do next. The peace I'd been chasing for 2 decades. It was finally here, and it felt even sweeter knowing I'd earned it. But the bigger win wasn't mine alone. The real victory was what happened in the neighborhood. Kids were playing in their yards again. Families were out biking through streets that used to feel heavy with tension. About 3 months after sentencing, a young couple approached my gate. They were house hunting in the area and had heard about everything. "Thank you," the woman said, holding her toddler's hand. "Because of what you did, we feel safe raising our family here. This feels like a real community now." And that's when it hit me. This was never just about a fence or my land. It was about standing up when it mattered, even when staying quiet would have been easier. That evening, sitting on my porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, I thought back on everything. Sometimes, a peaceful life doesn't come freely. Sometimes, you have to fight for it. And sometimes, hiding your true self is the very thing that holds you back. Off in the distance, I saw children laughing, neighbors chatting over fences, and a community that had finally broken free from fear. This is what happens when good people band together and say enough to bullies. Donna's name has vanished from the county roster. But someone still mails me anonymous flyers that say, "Reclaim your neighborhood." I toss them in the fire pit. As I watered my new oak, I realized something. Both the tree and this neighborhood had needed a second chance to grow the right way. The new fence is stronger. Just like this community, just like me. Justice may not always come quickly, but it shows up right when and where it's needed most. Sometimes the fight you dread is exactly the one you must win to finally find peace. Some people build fences to keep others out. But I've learned some build them to decide who stays trapped inside. Maybe the real takeaway is this: you don't truly know your neighbors until they tried to move your boundaries. And if you've ever been through something similar, I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. If this meant something to you. There's a little thanks button below. It helps more than you know. Thanks for spending time here. Catch you in the next one.